Hello, fellow Tolkien fans. Welcome to the second podcast of my new podcast I've been releasing. We are going to continue with the Hobbit films review. I have a special guest. My brother Ryan is here to help me do the review.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. It's been fun. So what we're going to talk about is he just watched the standard edition of the Desolation of Smaug, and we are going to discuss it. But first, we'll just dive right in. I want to talk about the whole trilogy, because I'm not sure if I'm going to have you back for the third movie, depending on how you do. We'll rate your performance, and then we'll see if you're worthy of coming back.
Right.
But what I wanted to ask you about is, what did you think of the Hobbit trilogies when they first came out? And then now that you've rewatched one of the movies years later, how has your opinion differed? So instead of initially, when they came out, maybe you were a little hyped up about it, and now as the dust settled, maybe you realized they weren't as good as they were?
Well, actually, when they first came out, I was disappointed because I knew that they had veered so severely from the book that it totally bummed me out.
Right. I would agree that now I think of them that way. But when they originally came out, I was actually kind of in like a fan denial mode. Similar, I think, to Star Wars fans when the prequels came out. Some of them were like, no, it's good, just because, it's Star Wars. And they just wanted it to be good, and they didn't want to believe that it wasn't good. And right. I think I had a little bit of that. I mean, I did like the first movie, but in my opinion, there's a large drop-off in the second movie.
Yeah, I think that the movies are entertaining. I don't think they're great. I think that they are paling in comparison to The Lord of the Rings. Obviously, I think that's a no-brainer. And I think that in general, the movies do a good job of keeping me engaged, and they're fun to watch. But as far as the actual plot goes, and as far as the story build-up and the emotional investment into the characters, it's kind of garbage.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some unforgivable scenes. I hate to reference a movie we're not reviewing, but obviously in the third installment, Battle of the Five Armies, there's like maybe 200 decapitations that were unnecessary. In Lord of the Rings, there's maybe 6, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of fan service in these movies. You get to see Legolas running around kicking ass and stuff like that, but, I don't watch it just for fan service. I really want to see them do justice to the Lord of the Rings universe.
Well, Peter Jackson did a couple different things when he was filming these movies. One of them is, I believe he changed the camera use he was using. He used a higher frame rate, nearly double the frame rate, so the movies don't look the same visually. He used CGI orcs, which I mentioned in the last one, which I thought was a huge mistake because of the makeup and all that stuff that was just so good in The Lord of the Rings that they didn't use in The Hobbit. And it just seemed like maybe he got lazy. Maybe he didn't want to deal with the makeup. Maybe it would take too long. He wanted to get the production rolling. Maybe Time or Warner Bros. Was putting this increasing deadline on him. They weren't giving him that much time. And he said, I don't have time to do all this makeup every day and wait hours for this makeup to be put on to shoot. I just want the dwarves to put up their costumes, swing their sword in the air, and some goblins get decapitated.
Right. I actually think that's a pretty good take. I think that Peter Jackson has made one of the best trilogies of all time in The Lord of the Rings. And my guess is that you're right. He probably felt pressure to continue to produce and wanted to make more money. And because of that, he didn't do as good of a job. And, from what I've heard, he might have not even wanted to make these movies. Maybe it was a complete obligation on his part and no passion involved. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of disappointing to see how far that these Hobbit movies fell from the standards that the Lord of the Rings set.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can definitely see that there's a drop-off. And along with that fan obligation and the passion you're talking about, I feel like he may have had the passion, but what I theorize is that in The Lord of the Rings, he's cutting down material. He has a lot of material to work with. He's cutting off of the books, right? He's cutting huge chunks out. So he doesn't have that much room to add in. In The Hobbit, he's trying to make a a 3-movie, and his movies are 3 hours, a 3-movie trilogy out of a book that's 270 pages. It's not that long. And instead of having to cut out stuff from The Lord of the Rings, he has to add on his own stuff. He has to look in the lore, and then he can take a little bit more liberties with it. And he can add stuff that, maybe isn't necessarily canon, but, is fun. And, he needs to make these battle scenes unnecessarily long and, with the CGI and just scenes that aren't all that important, taking a long time. And it just seems a little bit unnecessary.
Yeah, that was my first impression when I saw these movies, is there's too much fat. There's way too much. It needs to be trimmed down, and it could have been one movie, it could have been maybe two. And that's really what I think. So, yeah, I completely agree.
I think 2 movies would be good, because I like the addition of the White Council. I love that part. I don't necessarily like some of the other additions that he made, like the Azog. The Azog edition with all the, the drama with Azog and all that stuff.
Right.
I think that could have been cut down. I think a lot of things. Definitely the entire Kiwi Tariel love scene, which we'll discuss later.
Is it Keely?
Yeah, Keely.
Is that how you pronounce it? Okay.
Yeah. The entire Keely Tariel love sequence was, in my opinion, and I've heard other people who don't think this somehow, is that it was completely fabricated. It was completely forced. It had no place in the story. Peter Jackson was trying to put a love story again into a movie that didn't need it, just to go Hollywood, and it ruined a lot of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know if you wanted to wait to talk about that piece later, but that's one of my biggest complaints about this movie, is Tariel is basically forced to love a dwarf and makes Legolas look completely stupid. And it just makes me so upset. It's like, Keely is not anywhere close to the man that Legolas is, and he has done nothing to earn that love. He's done nothing to show that he deserves this 600-plus-year-old woman's affection. It doesn't make any sense. And It's just this love at first sight thing. It's like, oh, he's tall for a dwarf, and, Legolas says, he's ugly just like the rest of them. It's just silly. It's like they make Legolas look like this kind of dumb kid.
He's petty. He looks petty.
Yeah. And it's like Legolas from The Lord of the Rings is an honorable guy. And he is right there with Aragorn and Gimli the whole time. And yeah, he says some silly things and he banters with Gimli. But for the most part, he's super solid in those movies. He's very stoic and he's very honorable. And in these movies, they make him seem vain. They make him seem like the spawn of his arrogant father. And it just makes Legolas look horrible. Now, he still is a badass fighter, but that's about it. His character is shallow in these movies.
I completely agree. I mean, something happened to Legolas in Peter Jackson's world between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, where instead of being like an emotionless blob who doesn't care about anybody, he becomes this, this vibrant young character. His eye color's different.
Yeah.
He's so many things.
He looks totally different.
Yeah. And it's almost unrecognizable. He looks cold and distant in this movie.
Yeah.
And in The Fellowship of the Ring, he's a character everybody wants to attach themselves to. They love Legolas. Legolas is a fan favorite for sure. And I think that, what Peter Jackson did was the fact that Legolas is not in the book. Legolas is not in The Hobbit. So Peter Jackson could do whatever the hell he wanted with Legolas. He fabricated whatever sort of he wanted, whatever he wanted to do to build his Hollywood story. And you know what? I love Peter Jackson. He's a great director. But when he's trying to add material, he's far worse than when he's trying to cut it down. Because I thought he did The Lord of the Rings excellently. I mean, there's a few minor things, obviously separate from the books, that I would have liked to be changed. But I think that, honestly, that The Hobbit was kind of atrocious as far as, serving the actual canon and lore of the Lord of the Rings universe, and also as a prequel to those great movies, The Lord of the Rings.
Right. And the thing is, if you're going to put Legolas in, then do something cool to build up his character. Give him some real emotional investment. Make a character build up that when you watch The Lord of the Rings again next time, it makes him even cooler, not makes it worse. And that's what bums me out. They could have, they really could have made Legolas a little deeper here. If they're going to use him, they should use him in the right way. I mean, he's one of the most intriguing characters in the Lord of the Rings universe, in my opinion. And I love the way that he fights, and I love the mystery behind his character. And to take that mystery away and replace it with this shallow storyline is kind of unacceptable.
And what they do with Legolas in Lord of the Rings is he's kind of like the stunt man, and I don't mind it because it's limited, right? He like hops on the shield and he does all these cool elf tricks, going down the stairs in Helm's Deep, shooting people, taking down the the Mumakil and the
the elephants.
Yeah, all that was that was a little bit over the top. I liked it. I was a little kid watching that movie. I thought it was awesome. But in this movie, it was like times 10. He's standing on dwarves' heads, like, no-scoping people. Tariel's, like, shooting arrows out of the air, and then Legolas doesn't even say thank you. Like, Tariel, right. First of all, like, that's, like, impossible. I don't know, like, maybe she has some, like, real keen elf sense. But to intercept an arrow in the air, that's some crazy shit. And it's, like, hard to tell what even happened. And it's just little ridiculous scenes. Like, maybe I'd appreciate if it was just that scene, but along with, like, that entire barrel sequence, which I want to discuss later, and all that. And I think that, those were a bunch of mistakes made in these movies. And I just want to, before we get too off track, I just want to hop right into the actual review. We are going to do the same thing as I did in my last video. We're going to take it step by step with the progression of the movie. I did a pretty bad job of it last time. I've written down a little bit better notes and refreshed myself with the movie and done a little bit more research. So hopefully this time it'll be a little bit more coherent as far as that goes. Do you have anything you want to say more about Peter Jackson or any of that before we start the review?
Yeah, there was just one piece. I think I basically was on the same page with you this whole way. The one piece that I kind of veer away from you in is that I don't mind the over-the-top combat with Legolas and Keeley. I think that that's kind of cool. I mean, Legolas was like that throughout the Lord of the Rings, and I could wrap my mind around there's these badass elves, and there's some of them that are higher rank that can do demigod type stuff, and to me that was cool. It was like, oh, like, wow, Legolas looks like a Marvel superhero or something the way that he's fighting.
Yeah,
it makes him seem like this this godly character. And, that's kind of like what Legolas is. He's a hero. So, in my mind, I can get on board with that.
And, I mean, I did enjoy watching those sequences, but I thought overall it made the movie worse, and that's just my opinion.
Fair enough.
So, I'm going to go ahead and start. We're going to start with the introduction. The introduction to the Desolation of Smaug was Thorin in Bree, and Gandalf meets him there, and there's two burly-looking fellows that are presumably about to kill him. And Gandalf, waves them off or whatever, uses a Jedi mind trick, whatever. And they go away, maybe just his presence. I didn't mind this scene. I thought it could have been a lot better. When you contrast it to the Two Towers, I think this is what Peter Jackson was trying to do. In the Two Towers, the introduction is Gandalf fighting the Balrog, and that is epic. It is the complete explanation of how he fell and such like that. Again, and then Frodo wakes up and goes, Gandalf, right? And then later it's explained how he defeated him. So it ties into the rest of the movie. This intro just seems like he was trying to do something like a flashback, like the journey to the quest. And I didn't mind that concept, but I thought it could have been executed better overall.
Yeah, I thought the scene with the flashback there with Thorin and Gandalf was okay. I mean, it wasn't necessary, but it was nice to have a little bit of context as far as like how they met initially and what led to this journey.
Yeah, I mean, I like the whole trying to take Moria sequence. It ties in Azog. If they have to have Azog, then they have to have these scenes to tie him in. They can't just have this random orc, right? They have to explain it. So I get it. But at the same time, I thought that, something's wrong with Peter Jackson where he's just not doing things as well as he used to. Maybe he's worn out, but like the introduction to the Two Towers, gears you up and first of all reminds you about what the movie is. Gandalf fell. If you don't know what happens to Gandalf later, spoiler alert, he comes back to life. So if you're just watching these movies for the first time, never read the books, and you said, "Oh, Gandalf's gone," you're seeing this in theaters. What's going to happen? And you know what? And then they remind you that he died, and that he's fell. Right? Then I feel like that's really like relevant to the story, and it kind of brings the audience back. And I feel like he tried to do this with like the origins of the quest itself, but I think it failed a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it was necessary to bring Azog's storyline in, but for the most part, it was contrived.
All right. Well, the next scene is Bilbo's looking over this ledge, and I think he sees Azog himself on his giant white wolf, his CGI wolf, and he are some of the other creatures Caragors, or are they? No, those are all just wolves.
They're not considered as Caragors?
They're just kind of like tokens wolves, like giant wolves. I think that they're different than wargs, and they're different than Caragors.
What about the creatures when they're fleeing to Helm's Deep?
Those are wargs.
Those are wargs.
So those are.
They look a little similar. I mean,
yeah, the wolves. The wolves are what pursue the Fellowship in Lord of the Rings, and they do.
When I said fleeing to Helm's Deep, just so you all know, I meant in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. In Lord of the Rings, the books, there's these wolf packs and these orc packs pursuing them before they take the pass through the mountains. And I believe these are the same wolves. They're also depicted in The Hobbit. They're kind of giant wolves as depicted. I thought they were depicted fine. The CGI felt less real than the CGI with the wargs in the Two Towers. In the Two Towers, when the wargs attack, they're like these realistic, like...
Oh, yeah.
They look like a real mutant
like
dog.
You could, yeah. Like you could foresee that being possible.
And these ones kind of just look too pretty and too, like... It's just like, it's almost too fine. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's like the higher resolution made it less realistic. Because it almost looks like it's drawn in. Because it's like a painting. It's like too perfect. And the wargs are like these like matted fur and like they're disgusting, and then they look like giant dogs, like giant mutant dogs.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a interesting contrast. So Bilbo sees these, he goes back to the company, and they're all praising him. And he also sees this giant bear, which is Beorn, and he tells them about it, and Gandalf knows who he's talking about. So they flee to Beorn's house.
Yeah.
Gandalf says run for the millionth time in the franchise, as he loves to do. And then they go in, they lock the door, and they spend the night, and Gandalf's like being all dramatic. You'll be safe tonight, I hope.
Right.
Like, to try to make it like seem like something might happen.
Well, they do, like, in general with Gandalf in these movies, they add a little kick to his personality where they take his grim humor from the Lord of the Rings, and they make it like really different. Like they really zone in on it. Does that make sense? Like those scenes where he's like, I hope, or he's like, who knows if you'll really be okay. There's just those scenes where it's almost like they're trying to be funny or something.
Yeah, Gandalf's character, and I want to touch on this, it might be either Ian McKellen aging, and he's not displaying it the same way, or just the fact that the script is written way differently.
It's filmed differently, too.
Yeah, I mean, in The Fellowship of the Ring, Ian McKellen is an amazing actor. I mean, he is the perfect Gandalf in my eyes. A lot of people think that Christopher Lee should have been Gandalf, but I thought they casted it perfectly.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a difference in the character. Some of the authentic moments seem a little forced. Like when he's like, and remember, courage is not knowing when to take a life, but when to spare one. Like that sequence, I felt, it was good, but I thought it was a little forced. So like Gandalf scenes like that, they seem a little forced. I still think Gandalf saves the movie a little bit because everybody loves Gandalf.
Right.
Just like Martin Freeman saves the movie with his incredible acting. The whole movie, like I mentioned, he's just on point. Yeah. And some people may not like certain sequences, but if anything, he saves this movie from being an utter disaster.
Yeah.
So they get into the house, and they spend the night, and then they wake up, and I think this might just be the extended edition. All the dwarves come out in groups to introduce themselves to Beorn, so he doesn't get surprised. Was that not in the...
Nope, that's not in the regular edition.
Yeah, so in the extended edition, they don't want Beorn to be startled, so they introduce the dwarves, like, in pairs. Like he's some big oaf. I believe that's exactly how it is done in the books. I didn't mind that scene. But he comes in, he's like, I don't like dwarves.
Right.
And
that was in the regular edition.
Right, and he agrees to help them.
Because he hates orcs even more.
Yeah, because they tortured his family or something. And
he's the last shapeshifter left.
I think that's interesting. I'd really like to study the lore of the shapeshifters.
I thought that was cool. I thought that was cool for sure. You know, the thing with... It's like, if you're going to include him in this movie, you know, it would have been nice to see him kill one of those wolves or something. Like, do something with him, you know, but
he's kind of like a sentry. Like, he's just kind of standing watch.
He's just doing nothing, and, you know, that's fine. It's been a while since I've read The Hobbit. I don't think he fights anyone in The Hobbit, but I could be wrong about that.
Well, in the Battle of Five Armies, he comes in and he kills Bolg.
Oh, okay.
And so he also...
in the movie, you're saying?
No, in the book. Okay. He kills Bolg.
I don't remember that in the movie.
In the movie, the eagle drops him down and he takes out like a whole platoon.
So he comes back in the movie.
Yeah, he helps.
I totally forgot about that.
Every character introduced, almost every character introduced in these films and in the books, like, comes back to the Battle of the Five Armies. Fair enough. Yeah.
It just seemed like with that scene, though, with Beorn, they could have done something. He's standing watch, you know, he could have torn up an orc or something like that, or a wolf, but whatever. I mean, it was fine. The scene was pretty quick, and then they move on to Mirkwood.
Yeah, they move on. They take the ponies. I think Gandalf shouts "run" a couple more times.
That brings me to a point I wanted to make about this movie. It feels less like a movie and more like a comic book series. It feels like the adventures of Gandalf, the Hobbit, and the dwarves. It's like, or Gandalf, Bilbo, and the dwarves. It feels like it's just a bunch of little adventure stories that you'd read in a comic book.
It was like it's like little episodes of stuff happening.
Yeah, exactly. Like these little episodes of Gandalf being like, run. You know how comic books are. It's like the same stuff filtered through different stories. That's what it feels like. It feels like the adventures of Gandalf, and, you know, here's all the different things Gandalf does. Look at him doing this here, saying run, and look at him fighting this here. And it's just like, you know, this is not a proper production for this type of Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien story. It doesn't really fit.
It's not fluent.
It's not a Marvel movie.
Yeah, it doesn't flow.
Comic book stories.
Yeah, it doesn't flow like the Lord of the Rings does.
No,
nothing feels out of place in the Lord of the Rings. In this one, it's like, what's the point of the sequence? And it's like Peter Jackson had to include some of these sequences. They're in the book, obviously, and he just didn't mesh them very well. It feels like he did in Lord of the Rings.
Right.
So they arrive at Mirkwood, and then Gandalf, as he does in the book, has to leave the company.
He has to leave what does he say in the book? I forget.
He has to leave. Well, he has to go to the High Fells. In the book, he has to attend a White Council event. Okay. It was what it says in the book, and it's basically the same thing.
But in the Mirkwood, he walks into the Mirkwood and he sees that the forest is filled with darkness and
the
evil,
Eye of Sauron
evil
symbol.
Energy, and so so he remembers. Oh, okay, so the Lady Galadriel was right, and so that means
she comes into his head, right? Yeah, she speaks to him.
There's like some sort of prophecy in his mind that she says or something.
I think she uses telepathy with him.
I couldn't tell if it was telepathy or him remembering her saying something.
I think it was telepathy, because she definitely told him, go to the High Fells, and then he said, so be it, as if responding to her.
Well, he leaves, is the point.
Yeah.
He leaves the dwarves, and they have to go into the forest alone.
And then, before we get into the actual Mirkwood Forest, let's just talk about that. He goes to the High Fells, which I thought is probably one of my favorite parts about this movie, is him going to the High Fells. And I think they did that part awesome.
Yeah.
It's like this crazy prison that he has to take up steps, and there's this old man,
broken out cages, and it's creepy.
It's it's and then Radagast appears there. I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
Radagast can just teleport.
Right.
Like, I thought that was neat. And Gandalf somehow had to walk all the way up those steps, and Radagast's like, this is not a good place to meet.
yeah. How did he get there? That's a really good question.
Like, do all wizards have this teleporting power, or is it just Radagast?
I liked Radagast, though. I liked his place in this movie.
He's a cute character. He's not... He's somebody that you don't really want to take seriously in the movies.
It was funny. He had birds in his hair, and he's fun. I mean, I like the way they did Radagast.
I like it too. I like it too. A little bit of comic relief, as Peter Jackson loves, but I like Radagast's role. So he looks at the High Fells. You know what, man? Instead of all the other bullshit, I wouldn't mind a flashback to, like, Angmar when, like, the Witch King's making his heyday, and, like, they have to imprison him, and, like, the battle, and, like, all that shit, and Gandalf's, like, reminiscing about that. Like, I wouldn't mind some shit, like, about that. Like, that'd be way better than, like, the
At
Moria
least it's
scene.
canon at that.
Yeah.
At least it's real.
Yeah. That'd be cool. So he leaves, and then they go to Dol Guldur. And then Gandalf enters Dol Guldur, and then he's like, it's inevitably a trap. And then he, like, walks down the thing, and then Radagast is just like, all right, peace.
Right, yeah. No, because Radagast was like, are you sure it's not a trap? And he's like, no shit, it's a trap. see you later, dude. And should we talk about this sequence, or should we wait until later?
Well, we should probably wait. We should probably go back to Mirkwood.
Okay.
But, I mean, just the fact that he's getting there, I think, what does he tell Radagast to go see Galadriel, right? And, like, go inform...
Go tell Galadriel that...
I'm fucked.
The necromancer is... I might be getting this wrong. Something about, go tell Galadriel I'm going to this place, and the necromancer's here.
I believe he knows Sauron. He doesn't
know yet. He doesn't know.
He's trying to force his hand. He's trying to force his hand.
He's trying to uplift the darkness. We can talk about that later. But what I'm trying to say is, so Radagast obviously goes and tells the White Council or Galadriel, because the beginning of the third movie, which we'll talk about another time, is kicked off with that scene where they find Gandalf, trapped.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think that Radagast probably didn't need to have that big of a role in the entire movie just to finish on Radagast. I thought it was probably fine before we get down to Mirkwood. But, like, there's some scenes where it doesn't really make sense that he's there. And I believe he's only mentioned, like, a couple times in the books. And now I guess we move on to Mirkwood back. So I love how they did Mirkwood. It was like he was on some acid trip, or he took some mushrooms. There's a couple memes online.
Yeah, that was cool. I like the way they filmed that.
Like, slowly getting, like, worse and worse.
Yeah, that was entertaining and
it was trippy. It was like holy shit.
One time Bilbo looked back and he saw himself.
Yeah,
which was funny. And
all the dwarves are becoming more and more like even worse than Bilbo.
Right, and they can't find the sun, so then Bilbo realizes, okay, if I'm going to find the sun, since we're lost, I need to climb up to the top of the tree line. And he gets up above the trees, and butterflies fly up, and he sees this beautiful mountain vistas, and he sees the mountain with Smaug in it. What's it called?
The Lonely Mountain.
He sees the Lonely Mountain, and he's like a breath of fresh air. He's super happy. He gets all this clarity about where they are, and he comes back down. And before he comes back down, he sees that the trees are like moving in the distance, and that's the spiders.
Right. And I like how, he's like, and then, like, he can, like, breathe, and it's all clear, and he can see the lake, and he can see, the Lonely Mountain, and then he goes down, and he realizes his friends are just nowhere to be found. I liked the scene. I think they cut out a lot of this. In the extended edition, they have to get across a bridge.
Right.
Gandalf says, don't go in the water. Bomber falls right into the water.
Right.
I think that at that point, they were pretty much screwed because they had to carry around this big fat dwarf on this thing. In the movies, I mean, they do it a bit differently. In the book, I remember them fashioning some sort of raft. I could double check on that, but I believe they get across the river with some sort of raft. And then they leave the Elven path just because they're so disillusioned and they think that they can go somewhere quicker that way. And then the spiders ambush them. Bilbo, I think it's interesting because it's as if Bilbo is more resistant to the spiders like venom or whatever they stuck him with to make him unconscious than the other dwarves. Maybe the dwarves were just...
edition, I don't think he got stuck with anything.
Right. It's almost as if they were like asleep just from the forest or the the forest is like mist, as if they were just like bomb or like they're just like really drowsy, no idea what's going on. He
certainly seems to have more resilience.
Yeah, they definitely display him as like...
Thorin, too. Thorin seemed to be more resilient than the other dwarves in general in the Mirkwood sequence.
Yeah, and I enjoyed how they did the spiders, and I like how he put the ring on, and like you could understand what they were saying.
Yeah, that was really good, because I remember in the book, you could hear I think you could hear the spiders talking.
That's one of the things Peter Jackson did well, because, in The Hobbit, there's a lot more creatures speaking than in The Lord of the Rings.
Right.
As if they have like voice boxes and they could speak. And I thought Peter Jackson, did that well, because if he didn't do the sting sequence, that would have sucked, because that's an important sequence.
Right, when he was like, it stings when the spider got...
That's how he named the sword. That's an important sequence, so it's good he included that. And then Bilbo, this kind of ties in. I didn't mind this. He has to fight that creepy little armored white spider for the ring. Is that...
Yeah, what is that thing? I mean,
it's like a
totally different spider.
It's like a crab spider.
All these spiders, they were like a little bit smaller than Shelob, but, they were big.
I think they're actually the spawn of Shelob.
They were big. They're big-ass spiders.
They're pretty big. And they went down like fools. I would be curious to find out what makes Shelob so much more special than all those other spiders. Well, Shelob is like one of the OG spiders.
Like, she seems infinitely more powerful than these spiders.
Well, because I believe Shelob is actually like, they are the spawn of Shelob. So I think she birthed most of these Mirkwood spiders. Yeah, because there's like a limited amount of spiders that are named in the Silmarillion. Ungoliant, I believe is how you pronounce it. I'm probably butchering that. It's like some giant spider that
sounds like a male.
I believe so. Don't quote me on that. But like this giant spider teams together with Melkor, and they consume the light of the two trees, and they take the last light left to create the sun and the moon. So there's definitely
this is like Silmarillion.
Yeah, this is some like origin shit.
Yeah.
So these giant spiders, I'm not sure. I'd have to do more research about their origins. My instinctual response is that they're a spawn of Shelob, and Shelob is spawn of Ungoliant. But I'm not positive on that, so that's not a confirmed fact. You need to do your own research if you want to confirm that to be canon. So anyway, he stabs this like little mutant like hybrid spider crab thing, and he takes the ring. I didn't mind that. It like ties in the Lord of the Rings to the Hobbit, because Peter Jackson needed to tie in the importance of the ring. In the book, when Jared Tolkien mentions the ring, it's kind of just this little trinket that he can go invisible with. It's not necessarily this all powerful ring that controls the universe. It's kind of just a ring of power is what it's mentioned as.
Yeah, well, you can see the ring starting to get to Bilbo in this scene when he defeats the white spider. He finds the ring which he had dropped on the ground, and he says, "Mine." And that scene was basically a build-up, like saying, okay, like the ring is starting to corrupt his heart a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit.
And yeah, I mean, even just traveling with the ring, I think it definitely... He's almost a little bit too possessed at this point, in my opinion, but I think Peter Jackson had to do that, because it takes Frodo a long time to display those same qualities, and then Bilbo is almost completely possessed by the ring in the Fellowship of the Ring, but he's still able to give it up. So obviously the ring I think its power is definitely increased when it goes closer to Mordor.
And as Sauron gains power.
Right, and maybe the fact that Sauron is in Dol Guldur, which is near Mirkwood, would technically increase the power of the ring over Bilbo.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I think.
And being in such a dark, corrupted place, such as Mirkwood, would probably have its effect as well.
Yeah, I think so.
So the elves come in from the hills and they have their fucking like semi-automatic bows that
and they take them down.
Yeah, they make the dwarves
Put
look
them in prison.
like amateur fighters, and they lock them up. Bilbo.
But then he takes Thorin. He takes the what's the main Thranduil? Thranduil. Whatever. I guess that was pretty bad. Thranduil. Okay, so anyway, Thranduil takes Thorin up to his throne, and basically
after Bilbo has snuck in.
After Bilbo snuck in with the ring on.
Yes, right before he closed the gate.
Right, and
let me real quick. I just want to talk about how they did this elf. Oh my gosh, I can't believe. Well, Mirkwood, the elvish city in Mirkwood that they have, I completely forget the name. I'm spacing, but the way that they displayed this kingdom that Thranduil holds, I love it. I love how the trees, with the bridges. I thought, that's another one of those brilliant Peter Jackson moments where obviously the visuals in these movies, I just want to touch on it, are still as good.
Cinematography, 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
I love the cinematography in this movie.
It's, the way that they display the mountain later, the way it's perfect.
The landscapes are gorgeous.
Yeah, it's obviously well done. But the problem is in other areas, as we discussed. But as you were saying, so Thranduil's trying to strike a deal with Thorin for his white gems.
And Thorin's like, yo, go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
This is an interesting scene because it shows that the arrogance of Thranduil,
yes,
and the greed of Thorin kind of butt heads together. I thought that was well done. It's like, and I did not like the casting for Thranduil at all. I
kind of agree with you. I mean, he seems a little intense.
I didn't like the way his face looked. I didn't like the acting.
Yeah.
But I get it. He's this arrogant elf.
The cartoons, he's like a green goblin.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
He's like the wood elves in
the Hobbit movie from like the 80s or 70s.
Yeah, they're like
maybe
these
the
like
60s.
Green mutants.
Right. But to finish my point, basically, I thought that the poor acting was forgivable. I get the point. There is like the pinnacle of greed and arrogance meeting each other. I think that's a cool concept. I think it was done well. And when they tried to strike a deal, Thorin was like, "Hell no, man! I'm not going to strike a deal with you." And I thought that was cool to show how stubborn dwarves can be, especially Thorin.
Well, he knew he had his buddy Bilbo. He had a lot of faith that Bilbo would get him out of that mess.
Yep.
Which is interesting because, like, honestly, like Thorin isn't influenced by the Arkenstone yet, but like later Thorin has no problem breaking his word. So he could have just been like, Thranduil, I'll get you those white gems, let us out.
Right.
But at this point, he still has his honor, and obviously this is a setup for the animosity between the elves and the dwarves, even in the Fellowship of the Ring, that Gimli and Legolas need to overcome before they become, like butt buddies. But they, they obviously set up some sort of animosity between the elves and the dwarves in these movies, because it goes back to the beginning where the elves would not come, and they just Thranduil rode up on his giant elk and was like, nah, and then he left.
Right.
So I think that's interesting. Obviously the rivalry between the elves and the dwarves goes back further than that, and they've had issues. But I think that's interesting. The dwarves and the elves they aren't fond of each other instinctively. They're rivals. They'll fight each other, but the ultimate uniter is their enemy, which is orcs and Sauron. So I think it's interesting that Thorin's willing to sacrifice the whole quest because of his pride and because he won't give up those gems. And I honestly
don't... And he thinks Bilbo might still save him.
Yeah. I don't necessarily... And that's like a Hail Mary attempt. He doesn't know that Bilbo has the ring.
Exactly.
How is a little hobbit going to sneak around these vigilant, keen-eyed elves, a whole palace, and find a way to escape? That just seems unlikely. So I didn't really get that, but you know what? It's fine. The sequences with Thranduil, I agree, kind of made me cringe a little bit. Something's off about the character Thranduil in these movies that they could have done better. Where it's like, you look at like corrupt leaders in Lord of the Rings, like Denethor. How well did they do Denethor? With the way, he, resented Faramir and wanted Boromir back. Good. And he was a bad father. Like, I feel like he's just, like, infinitely better than Thranduil. And in the third movie, it gets even worse. So we'll save a little bit more for Thranduil in the next movie. Yeah. But
it does say a lot about Legolas and how they screwed up Legolas in these movies. It's, they screwed up by representing him with this arrogant father that really only cares about his pride, and only cares about, sustaining the Mirkwood Elven legacy.
Right, and, like, that's a setup because, like, in the end of, the Battle of the Five Armies, he's like, there's a ranger in the north. His name you must find out on your own, which is, like, stupid.
Yeah, and like, he cares all of a sudden.
Yeah, and then, maybe he goes meets Aragorn and, like, finds his soul, and then he's Legolas we know in the Fellowship of the Ring 60 years later. I don't know. I don't really want to explain it to myself. I mean, I might look at... I really need to watch the appendices for these movies because I haven't seen them, because I didn't care about them that much to see them. Yeah. But I feel like if I watch those, it might maybe explain why Peter Jackson clearly represented Legolas differently.
No, there's no excuse for butchering Legolas, but we should move on. I mean, we're deep into this review right now.
Yeah, well, we'll keep going. We'll keep the wheels churning. So they get rescued by the elves. They escape. Bilbo lets them out. I like that scene. He gets in the barrels, and then Martin Freeman with his awkward, brilliant acting, is like, "Oh, I closed the door. How am I gonna get out?" And then he finally gets out by opening it again, which exposes them. And then they're saved by the orc attack after the elves realize they're escaping, and they get down, and then Legolas jumps on some people's heads, and Keely, most notably, is shot in the leg with a Morgul shot.
Yeah.
And he's injured. And then Tariel's like, no! And then...
yeah, exactly.
And because they established a bond.
Because they were already in love somehow.
Yeah.
Which, whatever. We've already covered that. That doesn't make any sense. But then at one point, one of the dwarves basically takes out, like, 50 orcs with a barrel roll.
Oh, Bomber? Yeah. Bomber?
Yeah. like just destroying them. And then when finally the barrel breaks, his axes break through the barrel, and he's like this spinning barrel axe machine.
I thought that was funny.
And he takes out even more. It was so ridiculous.
It was ridiculous, but it was funny.
It was funny.
I mean, they already had so many ridiculous combat sequences that I didn't mind that particular one. But, it's funny. That whole sequence is funny with the barrel roll. Not funny necessarily in a good way, like funny like what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
And then they get downstream. Keely pretends to be okay, and dwarvish pride. Which Keely with his poor excuse for a dwarvish beard, his like little stubble like 5 o'clock shadow he's got going on that they probably the actor couldn't grow one. Or they didn't want to put a prosthetic on him. They wanted him to look like the supermodel dwarf he looks like to make it feasible that Tauriel could fall for him. So he looks like a model. So they meet Bard on the shore, and Bard is like, we already saw all these crazy archery scenes, but here's another crazy archer, Bard, and he's like shooting.
He was really good,
shooting shit out of people's hands. And this is
like,
not,
don't mess with me.
Yeah, he's not introduced at this point in the books. He's way overinflated in the movies. I didn't mind it. Bard, the actor, I thought he did fine. I didn't mind the character. He barters them in to Lake Town.
Yep.
And gets them in through the toilet. And then I cringe every time that the daughters say "da," or the son instead of dad, because I'm an American. And
that didn't bother me.
I don't know. Something's off about that.
That didn't bother me at all. I was fine with that.
It was weird for me.
But then you get introduced to, the master and.
God,
Alfred.
They butchered that.
Alfred is a poor excuse for a worm-tongue-like character, and it is so annoying that they tried to bring in
He
this
looks like Wormtongue.
long black hair stubbly, kind of like gross looking guy that is awkward and sneaky, and he's a snake. And it's like, come on, guys, this is Wormtongue. You don't have to do Wormtongue again. We don't need that.
He looks like Wormtongue, but he's not nearly as good of a character as Wormtongue. And he's also, if they just make like a sneaky guy, that'd been fine. But he's like, especially in the third movie, he is entirely comic relief. Peter Jackson admitted it. He is ridiculously. It's probably the
same with the Master.
He's the worst. He is, and I've made this comparison. I've heard other people make it. He is the Jar Jar Binks of the Hobbit trilogy. Yeah. He is Jar Jar.
Pointless.
He is. People cringe when he's on screen. All the jokes he's supposed to have are not funny. I laugh at them because I think it's so pathetic that this is what they're doing. And like I was watching it with my cousin Garrett. When I watched him, and I was laughing at all the sequences. He's like, "Why are you laughing?" I'm like, "I'm laughing not because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's not funny."
Right.
And they're trying to make it funny with all these ridiculous Alfred sequences. And they start off, and it's okay, and then it gets worse and worse. It's like a snowball, and he becomes a worse character over time. And I really want to touch on Alfred in the next episode more, but that's just an introduction to this terrible character.
Yeah, and Peter Jackson really tries to pack way too much into this movie. You know, like, you can't have a whole nother story about the politics of Lake Town. You can't have a whole nother story about Bard's life. You can't have a whole love story between Legolas and Killy. Or I'm sorry.
It
should
triangle.
Be Legolas and Killy.
The love triangle they got going on.
Tariel and Killy. You can't do all that in one movie. You can't establish this Bolg and Azog story.
Right.
It's like, it's too much. You can't pack it in. You could do that maybe in a TV series, but come on. It can't be done in a 3-hour movie.
You're right. And it's
and then you want a good story development for Smaug. It's like, you can't pack all that in.
It's too much.
You're right.
It's too much, and it's not necessary.
It's like, how are you going to fit all this into one movie, man? It just looks dumb.
And then in the third movie, they completely butcher tying these storylines off. They don't.
No, you can't tie them off. It's too much.
Yeah, it's too much, and they introduced them too late. They introduced them in the second movie. It was too late to be attached to these characters. I completely agree. I want to finish. I want to have the grand finale about all this in the third movie. So I think that we should you want to just move on to going into Erebor?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I do have one more big piece about Gandalf I want to say before the end.
Okay, for sure. We will definitely touch on Gandalf again. So now we are to the point where Keeley injures himself when trying to steal out of the armory. And they get caught and busted, and then Thorin is like in front of the Master and all the people, and Dwalin comes out and says, "This is no common thief. This is Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror." Right, and has this big dramatic moment.
And then Bard comes out. And he's like, "Don't listen to them," because Thorin's trying to say, "Let me go to the mountain and take back my gold."
The people are swayed way too easily. They're like, a little gold or like immediate impending death. What do I want? Yeah. And they're all just completely ignore Bard. I thought Bard was supposed to be represented as some hero of the people, and everybody just disregards them for this prospect of gold.
Yeah, well, Bard basically was saying, listen, if he goes up there, that dragon is going to come down and kill all of us. So, and nobody listened, nobody cared. The Master guy didn't give a shit. He actually hated Bard already, so he was probably looking for a reason to, disagree with him in front of everyone. So he sides with Thorin, and they let Thorin go. They give him boats or whatever, and they go to the mountain, and
right. You can clearly see the Master's just trying to appeal to the people, and he's trying to win some of his favor back with the people by doing what the people seem like they want to do, right?
Yeah, and going against Bard because he doesn't like Bard.
Right. It's very adamant that Bard and the Master do not get along.
Right.
And instead of having Bard killed years ago, he sends Stephen Colbert to spy on him, who is an extra in this movie. It's interesting. So they go. I'm sorry. I'm just thinking this movie's awful. I say
that you say it's awful. It is awful, and at the same time,
I like it. I like it. It's
Yeah.
awful when I analyze, like when I first watch it, I'm like, that wasn't half bad.
Right.
And then I analyze it, and it just gets worse and worse. And it's there's some unforgivable moments. But we have one scene to talk about in a bit that is the best part of this movie. This review is taking a long time, so we're gonna speed it up a little bit. So we're gonna go into them leaving Lake Town. Keely and some others are staying. Keely, Feely, and Beaufort at least are staying. So they stay. Everybody else goes up the mountain. They leave the high pass where they're supposed to meet Gandalf, and then they immediately go up the stairs. Thorin is so distraught that they can't find the keyhole.
Oh my God.
At the end of Durin's Day,
So they
and he
give up.
immediately gives up. They just came
They
all
leave.
this way. And you know what? In the books, I believe it's just the last light of Durin's Day. It's not about the moon, but whatever. They can make that distinction. It's not a huge difference.
It's kind of like an interesting twist.
It's like an interpretation difference.
Oh, the last light is actually the moon because it's the last light of the day.
Because they know about the 24-hour cycle that ends at midnight.
Yeah, whatever.
Because they have an astronomical study.
So Bilbo opens up the key hole. Or no, Bilbo gives the key to Thorin, and Thorin opens up the key hole.
Don't forget that dramatic sequence when the keys almost
The key
fell
almost
down.
falls off the cliff, that's right. Thorin steps on it, he saves the key, he opens up the door.
I like the
pushes it
scene,
open.
actually. At this point, I like the scene. It's dramatic. It makes you kind of care for once. You care about, like, Thorin's having this dramatic moment. He opens the mountain, and then it's like, boom, you're in. Once again, Peter Jackson has inconsistency issues. This is a great scene, and then, it's followed up by other scenes with Alfred. But
And Keely being sick and getting healed by this magical woman named Tariel.
This elf slut who's willing to give her life away to this dwarf she just met. Yeah, it's a little ridiculous.
Like, they tried to make her so much like Arwen from The Lord of the Rings to make her this magical elf
with healing powers.
That loves her man so much. Aragorn and Arwen in The Lord of the Rings, they did a good job with that, and that was a believable love story with actual magical feeling behind it. And Arwen was awesome.
With a conflict. The real conflict being that one of them was a man and one was mortal and one was not.
Right.
And the conflict also being that Arwen's supposed to leave. The time of the elves is over. And the conflict with Tariel is not Keely is not nearly as good as that. And
remember when Arwen heals Frodo and she uses like the magic words? That's what they were trying to do here with
and by the way,
Tariel. And
those Arwen scenes weren't even in the book. Arwen is seen at dinner.
But at least they did a good job with it in the movie.
Right, but you're right. And
it looked believable. This one just looks like this cheesy light behind her, and she's like, Hashna la lashna, Oshna la lashna, and she's like glowing, and Keely's like falling in love, looking deep into her eyes, and it's just like, I laughed. I was like, give me a break. When I was watching it by myself, I was like, come on.
And it's interesting because it's, like I said to Garrett, it's like she put on an Instagram filter.
Yeah, it looks cheesy.
It's awful. But moving on, because I want to brush on Keely and Tariel a little bit more.
Really?
It's because it's so awful. But I want to get to the best scene. Bilbo enters the mountain, and this is if this could just be the only scene in this movie.
They could have made this
with the High Fells scene.
Yeah.
And this scene is the only reason I give this movie a good rating at the end. A decent rating. So I look at this scene, and it's perfect. First of all,
and it's by the book.
Yeah, Benedict Cumberbatch was a perfect voice. He sounds like a dragon with his little edits. They have it in. It's so dramatic. I'm on the edge of my seat. Mm-hmm. Smaug has a great personality. He's boastful. Bilbo tries to trick him like he does in the book. And Smaug's like, barrels. I love that. I love everything about this scene. I can't notch it at all. Just like the Gollum sequence with Bilbo in the first movie, which was their great scene in that first movie. This is the great scene in the second movie that makes this movie great.
I totally agree.
It's the sequence with Smaug, and they're running down, and he sees the Arkenstone, and Smaug's playing with him like a cat with a mouse. It's perfect.
Yep,
and you know what? And he sniffs out the ring, and he makes him take it off because the power is overwhelming, and Smaug casts some sort of spell, which I think is awesome.
How does he do that? Like, Smaug obviously
Smaug's
has
a great
magic.
power of
Smaug,
evil.
like, knew that was Sauron's ring.
Well, he knew that. Yeah,
He was like
implied he
and
did.
You saw the eye of Sauron when he took the ring off.
Right, and what I thought's interesting is that Smaug is actually I believe he was a servant of Morgoth, because all the dragons and Balrogs pretty much served Morgoth, and I believe they were created by Morgoth. So he is very in tune with dark powers. He is not like a neutral party. He is evil. He's evil.
Well, he could sense Bilbo's presence without even...
He knew he had a great evil power.
Yeah,
on
so
him.
he obviously has some sort of magic. That's
right.
obvious.
Dragons are magical, and he obviously
not only that he breathes fire and he's impenetrable, but he has some other powers too.
Yeah, he saw. He was like something much more precious, and like it like did some crazy trippy
the
thing.
precious part was
and
cool.
he had to take off the ring. It was too much. Just like Frodo had to take off the ring at some points in the Lord of the Rings. So I like that scene.
Yeah.
And then, at the end, Smaug sees Bilbo eyeing up the Arkenstone, and he's like, at this point, you're not even aware that Smaug knows the Arkenstone's right there, but he knew the whole time. And he's just like, I'm almost tempted to let you take it and watch how it devours him. Right. And I thought that was good. And then they bring it up later. That's awesome. So he takes the Arkenstone in like some sort of like roll move, which we don't know until the third movie. We don't know that he is the Arkenstone.
Oh yeah, that's right. We don't get to see it.
Right, but he does take it. Spoiler alert.
But he tells Thorin. I think he tells.
He said. I believe he says.
I don't have it.
Or Thorin says, "Does the Arkenstone? Did you find it?"
And he's just like, we gotta go.
Yeah, there's a fucking dragon.
And Thorin holds a sword up to him. Like Thorin's ready to kill Bilbo.
The curse of Erebor is already strong on Thorin by the time he is right there.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about this movie is there are some real messages that get across about arrogance and greed. Smaug is arrogant, Thranduil is arrogant, and Thorin is arrogant and greedy, and it kind of brings together this bigger message about those concepts.
I believe that's if I would say one thing about the actual Hobbit book, what it's about is greed. It's about greed and desire and stuff like that, and how those can lead you astray. And in the movies, they do a good job with it for the most part, but they, a lot of the times the message of the movie is unclear. Like, okay, is the message greed, or is it, something else? Or, what are you trying to, is it a love story?
Yeah, they tried to, like we said, to pack too much.
If they made it a 2-movie thing and just made it about greed.
And arrogance.
Yeah, and arrogance.
Pride.
It would have been great.
Yeah.
So moving on, they have this huge scene with the dwarves and Smaug, and I thought it was entertaining. It's like the other scenes. Looking back on it, I've seen some reviews about it that made me more skeptical. I don't care still. I like the scenes.
The fight scene?
Yeah, the fight scene. I think it's cool when they have that giant gold dwarf.
Yeah, that's cool.
Although Smaug could have killed Bilbo and Thorin at many points.
Well, but the point that they were getting across there is, and I think they did a good job, is, yeah, obviously Smaug is powerful enough to kill them, but he was so arrogant that he was touting them along and taunting them and trying to, kind of hold them out on a string so that he could kind of play with them like a cat playing with a mouse. So
I disagree. They make Smaug look like he's incompetent in this scene. He does not know where they are. He is like, and he's fucking pissed. He's frustrated. Smaug's mad.
Yeah.
He's being baited.
They definitely tricked him a few times.
He's being baited.
But he could have killed them a few times and he didn't because he was being cocky.
Yeah, he's first of all he gets tricked like 6 times in a row. He finally gets him in his grasp.
And he likes to talk. He likes to talk a big game.
Yeah, and then he finally is like, you know what? I'm gonna go kill those Lake Town people.
And Thorin doesn't give a shit about that. Yeah. Only Bilbo cares about that.
Well, the other dwarves
Thorin doesn't care.
The other dwarves
care. Yeah, but
care.
Thorin doesn't. Thorin could care less about other people at this point. His greed has gotten that deep.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, he's not completely...
He's not himself.
He's not completely corrupted, but he's not himself. Yeah, he's still a little
possessed. a little bit.
So, that's it. And then Smaug basically rolls out of there, and they have this kind of cringy scene where he's like, I'm fire, I'm death. And then they end it before the Lake Town scene for some reason, instead of it ending on him being killed. Which, whatever. I'm not going to complain about that too much, but I know other people
They just didn't have enough time. It's already been almost a 3-hour movie.
Well, they knew they wouldn't have anything for the third movie. What are they going to make a battle that's one chapter the entire movie?
Right.
And it's.
Yeah, that's a fair point. But we should get to Gandalf and the scene where he gets captured.
Right. So
because that's to me is the most important thing that we could talk about at this point.
Gandalf goes into Dol Guldur, and he finds Thrain in the extended edition.
And remember, this is right after he parts ways with Radagast, which we talked about earlier.
So he meets Thrain only in the extended edition, so you didn't see this. But he meets Thrain, and Thrain's like this demangled, like, dwarf thing, and Gandalf, like, casts a spell on him, and then Thrain's, like, killed, like, immediately after. Like, he's...
So it's basically pointless.
Yeah, it's just, all it's trying to explain is that Thrain had the last of the 7 dwarf rings, and they cut his finger off, and they found it. And now Gandalf
Who's
is...
they?
Sauron.
And his orcs.
And his minions. So... now Gandalf is basically walking in there with one of the Elven rings of power, and I think that was a little bit dumb on Gandalf's part. If I had any complaints about this scene, he knew he was going to get captured, so he's just banking on Galadriel showing up right in time in the third movie. But he comes in, they have that cool scene with Sauron, and then like the flashing eye, which probably gave a bunch of kids with epilepsy seizures. Where he's like,
but I thought that was cool.
Yeah, it was cool, and
he gets overpowered by Sauron,
which is right. He should be overpowered by Sauron,
even at that point where Sauron is not fully developed.
Right, and he holds his own for a little bit.
He does, and that was really cool to see the battle against from the light to the dark, and Gandalf when he was uplifting the spell on Dol Guldur, he really did a great job of like.
It was much better in the standard
light
edition.
Being cast out and stuff like that. I thought that was cool. I thought it was like, oh, that's cool. Gandalf and his powers are showing up in this movie right now. I really love seeing that. So, no complaints about the way that they choreographed it. You know what I mean?
It was fine.
It was fine, and it was cool to see the face off with Azog and basically after he lifted the spell, there's all those orcs everywhere.
And Gandalf could take Azog.
He could take if Sauron wasn't there, Gandalf would have probably escaped because he was just toying with them. He's just knocking shit down.
Well, and plus he could just like hold with his force power. He could just hold back Azog and his wolves.
Yeah, he would have probably gotten away.
Yeah, he definitely would have. It definitely displayed him being able to get away. So that's where the movie ends. He gets captured. Well, the movie ends at Smaug, but this is where we're going to end the review.
But I got to say something about Gandalf.
Okay, go continue.
This is what I have to say about Gandalf. What really ruins this movie for me more than anything else is that in the Fellowship of the Ring, when Gandalf finds out that the One Ring has returned, he freaks and gallops to Minas Tirith to study. And he studies his
he suspects it's the One Ring.
He suspects it's the, and he confirms it at Minas Tirith. And this is all giving us the impression in the Fellowship of the Ring, everything that they did, that this is the first time Gandalf has any awareness that the One Ring is back.
Right.
That Sauron is back. Both. Okay?
This is them finding out
all of a sudden in The Hobbit, he knows that Sauron is back. That is such a huge plot hole. Do you think if in the Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf knew that Sauron was building an army to destroy the world, that he would go to Bilbo's 111th birthday party?
Well, he might define.
No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't be smoking his pipe with blowing up a big ship, a big pirate ship. No, he is a fucking demigod. He'd be saving the world. He wouldn't be doing that. It's so bad that they like. It's like, I get it. It's cool to show Gandalf and Sauron facing off in The Hobbit. It's a cool concept. But it's not real. It's like, it's not, it's a plot, you're making a plot hole. It's not fair to the real fans of Lord of the Rings. And Peter Jackson knows better. He knows that doesn't, if J.R.R. Tolkien were alive today, that would be the thing that upset him the most. I would guess.
Maybe. Because it's very possible. I don't think J.R.R. Tolkien would make it that far in the movie. He'd probably have a heart attack. Okay? As soon as he saw Alfred, he'd probably die.
Like, what the fuck?
You know, so it's, I mean, people think that J.R.R. Tolkien would have a heart attack watching Lord of the Rings. God forbid he'd have to watch these movies. Okay? Like, this man was he was very obsessive about the way things should be. So any changes he would not like.
Yeah, but especially this. Especially...
I mean, well, this is what's interesting. In the third movie, it's even worse. So Galadriel casts out Sauron.
The third Hobbit movie.
Yeah, the third Hobbit movie. Sauron is cast out by Galadriel.
You're not going to save that for later?
Well, I just want to mention it. Okay. Because it's important at this point. She casts him out.
I remember.
To Mordor. And after that, she's like, he will remain there and build up his armies in the east. And then Saruman's like, leave Sauron to me. And is that supposed to be dismissive?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that supposed to be, Gandalf's like, Saruman must just go kill Sauron. And now I don't have to worry about it anymore.
I can go to Bill.
And now I can act like nothing exists.
Yeah.
Like none of the events in this movie. I can just hang out and
do fireworks. Right. It's like, it's a huge plot hole, and it really ruins the movie.
If you watch the Hobbit trilogy and then the Lord of the Rings trilogy in that order, you will be so confused and be like, okay, well, how did Gandalf just fucking forget all that shit that just happened?
Right, exactly.
This guy's 6,000 years old.
It's a huge problem, and honestly, for that reason, I'm gonna go ahead and declare that the Hobbit movies, especially the second one, is not a legitimate Lord of the Rings tale, and should not be considered canon. And that's my opinion, and I can't, because I can't. Lord of the Rings is too good to allow that second movie in The Hobbit to ruin so many concepts for us that are really important.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not canon in a lot of areas, and that's, no one can dispute that. He took way too many liberties with this movie. Now, however, I don't think this movie was as good as the first Hobbit movie. However, I don't think it is as bad as the last Hobbit movie. So, my rating, respectively, would be 7.5. And this is, let me justify it, because I've done a lot of ranting about how bad this movie is. Okay? And the only reason is because I am entertained by this movie. The scene with Smaug bumps it up 2 points. Okay? That scene alone bumps it up 2 whole points. Okay, some of the concepts they did with Mirkwood, with all that stuff, is good enough to give it a 7.5. And the fact that I still think this movie is better than any Harry Potter movie. I still think this movie is better than a lot of fantasy movies you can go see out there. But the thing is that Lord of the Rings fans are so nitpicky about the lore and the canon, including me. To be. Right, we have the right to honor Tolkien in that way.
Yeah.
Tolkien deserves that we be nitpicky and that we demand the best quality. But the reason I rate it is because it's as far as a fantasy movie goes, it is still good. It is still better than a lot of fantasy movies. It is still entertaining. There's not a moment in this movie when you are unentertained. Okay? There are moments where you cringe. There are moments that you don't like. There are moments that are not canon. But the point is that this movie is good enough to keep you entertained. It's good enough to keep you in your seat, enjoyed, and dare I say, looking forward to the third movie to see what happens. You are not going to watch this movie after you've seen the first one and then be like, this was so awful, I'm not going to see the third movie. No, you're going to hope that they make some better adjustments and that the third movie is good and that they tie everything up nicely. You're going to give them that benefit of the doubt, which they don't. But spoiler alert. But at this point, you are somewhat content. As a person who's never read the books and isn't that familiar with Lord of the Rings, I don't know what you'd think of this movie. You'd probably think it was fine, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, if you remove the actual lore, you can excuse some of this stuff if you're just looking at it as just any movie. Can I give a rating?
Yeah, what would you rate it?
Because of the atrocity of the plot hole that I just discussed with Sauron and Gandalf that totally doesn't make sense, it knocks the movie down a full point to a 6. Entertainment, I was very entertained. I enjoyed watching the movie. It left me feeling good about what I watched. But I have to say, this, you can't forgive it. It's a 6 out of 10. These days, they can make anything entertaining with the technology they have in Hollywood. So I'm not going to say just because it's entertaining makes it a good movie. It's a 6 out of 10, and I think that's generous to me. But I can see where you're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, after we just destroyed this movie in a mere hour and 15 minutes, I think that a 6 is fine. I would not argue with anybody giving it a 6. But for me personally, the reason I love Lord of the Rings is Peter Jackson's films. I think he is an awesome director. I think he butchered a lot of this movie. But man, that Smaug scene, that gives me chills watching that scene. That
Great scene.
Awesome.
That scene, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, that scene's awesome.
But that does not redeem the movie.
It does for me enough to make it watchable.
Fair enough.
That whole movie, I'll be looking forward.
I'll watch it again, but I won't.
I'll probably watch this movie 30 more times before I die.
Wow!
I'll probably watch this movie 30 more times.
I'll give it a couple.
Because I watch The Lord of the Rings like 6 times a year.
I'll give it a couple watches.
So if I watch The Lord of the Rings 6 times a year, and I think The Hobbit is probably a third of as good as Lord of the Rings, I'll watch The Hobbit movies twice a year.
Fair enough. Hey man, fair enough. I see where you're coming from. I appreciate you having me on today. It was really fun, dude, and it's nice to talk to someone who knows a lot about this universe. And I will say, just for the fans out there that are watching Colton's show here, is that sometimes we talked about the Silmarillion and stuff like that. So if you don't know about that stuff, you should check it out. I don't know that much about it, but I know that it probably confused some of you who aren't aware.
And for you fans that are longtime fans, and if you've read all the stuff, I've read most of it. I appreciate you tuning in. I apologize for any mispronunciations by me or my brother. Any factual errors.
Thranduil.
Sauron, right? Any factual errors that I had, please let me know with evidence, because I know there's a lot of people who think or have speculative opinions about stuff. And I'm sorry, I do my research enough. I do not say stuff that I believe to be untrue. My intent is to increase the knowledge of people wanting to know more about Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. This review was more about the cinematic tale. I've not read The Hobbit in a few years. I've forgotten a lot of it because I've seen the movies, and it's probably altered what I thought about it. And it's probably made me say a few things that were not true about the books. I did do some research prior. If anything's inaccurate, like I said, please leave a respectable comment. I'm not the scum of the earth because I forgot one tiny detail.
Oh, God.
So please be respectful about it. I really appreciate everybody who tuned in. If you enjoyed this, if somehow you've listened to 115 minutes of me and my brother ranting.
I've listened to more longer podcasts than this.
You're right. If you thought this was quality enough, please like and subscribe and leave a comment saying that you enjoyed it. The whole reason I'm doing this is to, share my thoughts.
Listen to ourselves talk.
Yeah, no. The whole reason I'm doing this is because I wanted a good podcast about Lord of the Rings out there. I've not found one. I found several that were not up to my standards. So I hope that I can provide something like that. We're going to be doing more podcasts. We're going to do the final movie. Hopefully it won't take this long. And then we're probably going to review some other, maybe the Lord of the Rings films, although it'd probably just be me saying how good they are. And then we'll probably do some other reviews, and then just some discussions that I know a lot of you wanted to talk about. And if you have any suggestions for a podcast, please leave it in the comments. And if you have any suggestions for any of the LOTR Explained videos, leave it in the comments as well. Thank you guys for tuning in. This has been a podcast of the Tolkienist. Here with my special guest, Ryan. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Hope you have a good day.